I'd like to welcome everybody to our meeting here for the Foxborough Housing Authority for our Walnut Street neighborhood meeting. My name is Greg Spear, and I am chairman of the Foxborough Housing Authority. Currently, for people that aren't aware, the Housing Authority manages 179 units throughout the town. We have two main complexes. One is Carlin and Court. The other one is Centennial Court, and then we have scattered sites throughout the town. It's been over 10 years. It's been over 16 years since the Housing Authority has built any new developments here in town. And you'll be hearing during the presentation the need for both senior housing and family housing is, the demand is incredible. So we have been working on this site for over 10 years, trying to acquire it. And we'll be going through the history of that. And this is our first neighborhood outreach to let people know that we're in the planning stages for a development. So at that time, I would like to hand it over to Paige Duncan, who is our town planner.
Thanks, Greg. So welcome everyone. I'm Paige Duncan. I'm the planning director here in Foxborough. And I've been working on housing for a couple of years now. I see some names in the attendee list that have been joining us along. We've been doing this conversation on housing for about 2 years now. It started with the survey early on, and then we started the housing production plan. It's still in draft mode. It's in its second draft. And we've been a little paused, I'll be honest, just because we had to regroup after the comments were received. We wanted to do some more work. And honestly, at this point, it's paused mostly because of my workload. I'm busy working on this. And you know, I think you all saw the rotary traffic pattern. Don't throw any tomatoes at us. But so we've been doing a lot of work in town. Anyway, so this conversation housing has been going on for a couple of years. As we started it, it became very clear that there is a significant housing need in this community. And it's hard to imagine that because you look around in Foxborough and, you know, most people you feel have plenty of housing or they have good housing. It, you know, it feels like an affluent community that we can't imagine that some folks would struggle. But we've learned that they have been. And so in our housing production plan conversation, Walnut Street kept coming up as sort of the #1 option. You know, everybody knew that the Housing Authority had this land, and it was almost like Greg kept having to say, folks, you have to realize the Walnut Street housing project isn't going to meet all the housing needs of the community. But this was something that was really embraced during the conversation on housing as the next or an important option to pursue. It also came together because we were able to get grant funding. The state has been pushing communities to build more housing. There is quite a shortage of housing in the entire state. And they opened up something called Housing Choice. And through Housing Choice, we've been able to get $250,000 in grant funding. $200,000 has paid for the design for the signal for Walnut Street. As we all know, there's a desperately needed signal out there. So that has been designed at this point with Mass DOT review and whatnot. We also were able to design a sewer line that runs from Central Street down the other side of Walnut Street, under 140 and over to the project site. And again, that was also paid for by grant funding. That would allow the site to accommodate more units, which the original with on just septic was going to be very limited. And in all honesty, it's hard to attract developers when you have very small projects. You know, obviously developers need to make money. But there's a balance of how much they can make. But in this instance, if you make a project too restrictive, too small, it will not likely be responded to. So with that, I think I'll just turn it over. Like Greg mentioned, this is our first meeting. There is no project yet. I think Emily's going to make that crystal clear as we go forward. But this is not a project we have. This is the first conversation on this site. And because you all are stakeholders and neighbors, we wanted to be sure to let you all know what's going on and where we are and what the next steps will be. And just by way of introduction, we do have I think all members of the Housing Authority here, well, all but one member of the Housing Authority here tonight. We also have Maggie Hurd, who works for the Housing Authority. So we have fully represented over there. We do have you all on mute tonight, and that's just to keep background noise and distractions going. We're going to go through our presentation. Emily's our consultant, and she's helping us out with the RFP development. She's going to run this presentation. If you have questions that come up during the presentation, please write them in the chat. And then there will be Q&A at the end. We'll decide how to manage that, whether it's going to be just responding to questions in the chat or whether we can figure out, if there's enough sort of ability for us to communicate, unmuting, that would be fine. But sometimes that can get a little unruly on Zoom, we all know. So for now, please try to use the chat, and do understand that we will be taking your questions, and we do want to hear it from you. But for right now, we're going to go into our presentation and run you through what's going on, and then we'll let you ask questions after that. So Emily, if you would go ahead. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Paige. It's a pleasure to be with all of you tonight. I know it's a little bit of a precursor to summer tonight, but really appreciate the fact that you're here and that you're listening to us, and we're hoping to learn a lot from you tonight. So my name is Emily Innes. I'm principal of Innes Associates, and I'm a planner. I'm delighted to be working with the Housing Authority, and I'm just going to take you through the agenda. We're going to talk a little bit about what to expect out of this meeting. Show you the site. I know many of you probably know it already, but we're going to show it to you from the air. Talk a little bit in more depth about the housing needs in Foxborough, some of the related infrastructure improvements that Paige mentioned already. Then I'm going to talk about what an RFP is from a very high level, and why we're having this conversation now. Talk a little bit about the type of criteria we might be putting on this site, and that's really where we need your input tonight, is on the criteria, and then our discussion and a little bit about the next steps. The key for tonight's expectation, Paige mentioned it already, there isn't a project. This is the earliest possible stages for property that is owned by a municipal body, in this case, the Housing Authority, where they know they want to do some affordable housing on the site. The RFP, the request for proposal, allows them to put criteria in for the successful development of a site, and then developers would respond. And so tonight, we don't know the number of units, we don't know the mix of units or how many residents there would be, we don't know how many buildings there are, or parking spaces, or traffic impacts, or even entrances or exits to the site. What we're looking from you tonight is your thoughts about things that are important to you as the site is developed. And so we'll talk a little bit more about that. So we're going to talk about the site and the context and the timeline. As Paige mentioned, if you have questions as I go through the presentation, please put them in the chat. We'll try and answer at least some of them as we go, and anything that's not answered as we go or from the presentation, we'll answer at the end. And again, just to stress, this is the very first community meeting on this process, so we're looking forward to your comments. So here's the site. You can see it's bounded by Walnut Street here, Route 140, and the exit entrance to I-95, North High Street here. You can see some of the existing housing and sort of a block on top of that to make them pop out a little bit so we can see what's there. It's important also to see it in context. So it's fairly close to a farm stand across the street. If there were sidewalks in the area, it would be about a 10 to 15 minute walk to shopping, and a 10 to 15 minute walk to some of the medical services. So that's placing it into the overall context. You can see some existing neighborhoods. Some of you may be from those neighborhoods here. And then across, obviously, I-95, there's much more dense development and non-residential development. Now, the history is interesting. The site's been being discussed since at least 1989. So residents had originally approached the state to use land for a children's museum, but the site was zoned residential, and people really thought the IDC and the planning board felt that the site should be a taxable use. It's interesting a few years later, as the state begins its disposition process, that residents really wanted to see residential zoning here and not a proposed retail shopping complex at the time. That continued into the early 2000s. Until 2010, when DCAM, which is the Department of Capital Asset Management for the state, notified everybody that the property was surplus. The Foxborough Housing Authority said, we are interested. And so the conversation's really been continuing since 2011. So a base plan and feasibility study was done, funded by a grant in 2013. They've been making progress. And then finally, in an act of the legislature, the property was disposed of to the FHA, or transferred to the FHA. We'll be talking a little bit about disposition, but I want to keep the jargon as free out of this as possible. So that legislative move conveyed the land for the sole purpose of affordable housing. So the FHA can only do affordable housing on this site. The housing plan must also be approved by DHCD. And the FHA can't sell the site. It has to lease the site. It can lease some or all of the parcel. And the purpose is develop, construct, operate, and maintain affordable housing on the parcel. So in other words, they themselves don't have to do the development and the construction. They can lease it to somebody who will, and somebody who will actually do the maintenance and the operation of that. They can then use the funds for any purpose that they're allowed to use it under the enabling legislation that reference to 121B is Massachusetts general laws. And an important part of the disposition is if it is not used for affordable housing, it reverts back to DCAM. So just something to note. Now, the conversation on housing that Paige mentioned earlier, was in a couple of parts. One was the survey that was done in April 2019 and reached out to Foxborough residents to understand what their views on housing were. And the majority, 61% of respondents, felt that Foxborough was having a real challenge, both social and economic, because of its current housing options. Many people, 73%, felt that this prevented people of all age groups from living in Foxborough, and that the greatest housing challenges were seniors, 39% identified those, and young families, 35% identified those. So that was the context among the residents in terms of housing and affordable housing. My apologies. Also, the town has been working on its housing production plans. So in that plan, which is still in draft form, the FHA did identify this site for mixed income affordable housing. And it's important to note, I'm going to give you some statistics from the plan over this in the next couple of slides. So seniors were 12% of the population in 2010. They're now approximately 17% of the population, and they're expected to be 23% of the population by 2030. This is a 38% increase from 2010 to 2030. 58% of the households in Foxborough are only 1 to 2 people. And so when you look at the diversity of housing types and styles in a community, it's important to note whether there's enough to accommodate all of the different household size. And Foxborough actually does have a wide range, much wider range than some communities, but it still has an issue with housing that's appropriate for 1 to 2 people. And household size is projected to continue to decline, so more smaller households will exist. And then finally, although Foxborough is income diverse, seniors and renters are more likely to be low income and therefore have trouble affording housing. And in fact, 34% of households in Foxborough are low income. Now, low income is one of those terms that everybody throws around when they're talking about housing and affordability, and not everybody knows what that means. So, and that's not unusual, because low income, extremely low income, very low income are all based on household size as well as income. So it's not something where you can say low income just equals X. So in Foxborough in 2017, which is the data that we have, the median household income was $98,199. So that means half of the households had incomes above that and half had incomes below that. That's actually better than Massachusetts overall, but it is lower than the area median income. And you can see here in the table that we mentioned the area median income is $113,300. And you see Boston, Cambridge, Quincy, and you're going, why is Boston, Cambridge, Quincy here when we're talking about Foxborough? And that's because area median income, or AMI, is based on your metro region, not individual towns. And that can cause problems with affordability on various towns because their area median income may be lower than the regional area median income. And that is, in fact, true of Foxborough. Now, I mentioned that there's a disparity between homeowners and renters. So the average household income for a homeowner is just over $123,000. For a renter, it's $62,000. And so that's where we start to look at this. 34% of households are considered low income. We see the breakdown down here. So if you're low income, then you're at 51 to 80% of AMI. So that's a low income that we talk about. And you can see that that's dependent on household size. So I've got 1 through 5 here. That's the number of people in the household and what 50 to 80% of AMI means. So if you're a one-person household, it is the 62,000. So that's close to the average household income for a renter. If you're a 5-person household, the other extreme in this table, it's 96% is 51 to 80. So you can see 12% of Foxborough households are at the low income. 11% are at very low income, and that's 30 to 50% AMI. And then extremely low income is less than 30% of AMI. Now, often in conversations about affordable housing, the difference between low income and poverty is not always understood. Poverty is Department of Housing and Urban Development definition. That's at a federal level. And so the poverty threshold for a single person is less than $13,000 in annual income. And for a 4-person family, it's less than $26,000 in annual income. And in Foxborough, 4.3% of households live below the poverty threshold. Now, as we move into income and affordable housing, we see that we're going to break it down into elderly versus non-elderly. So elderly non-family households, and I apologize for the slightly more jargon here, but elderly non-family households, those that are not related anyway, just people living together. Maybe it's 2 friends sharing a place, or maybe it's just a single person. 35% of those in Foxborough are extremely low income, 24% very low income, and 19% are low income. When family houses, it's elderly family households, it's 7% are extremely low, 12 very low, and 14% low income. So you can see the breakdown on elderly family households and non-family households. It's quite high, with the people in the non-family households having the lower income. And then if you look at non-elderly households, 7 are extremely low income, 9 very low income, and 10% are low income. Now, in addition to income, there's something called cost burden. And so, some of you may have read or seen that you should just spend no more. It's a common rule when you're looking for a house and you're reading all that information, or an apartment. It says don't spend more than 30% of income on housing. And that means not just the rental or the mortgage, but household insurance and taxes as well. And so cost burden is when you're paying more than 30% of your income on housing. And extremely cost burden are those who are paying more than 50% of their income on housing. And what this means is that you don't have funds to afford other things. So because you're paying so much in housing, you may not be able to afford medical bills or food or transportation or any of the other things that you need to survive because you're putting so much of it in housing. So you see that 71% of Foxborough households that earn less than 80% of the area median income are cost burdened. So just coming back to that, 50 to 81% of AMI ranges from 62 to 96,000, depending on how many people are in your household. So 71% of people earning at those levels, or households earning at those levels, are cost burden. And then 59% of households with incomes 80 to 100% of AMI are cost burdened. So what that means is up to $113,000 in annual income, 59% of those households in Foxborough are cost burdened. So interestingly, and looking at how pre-COVID housing prices, which is what the draft housing production plan had available, the housing production plan stated that the average household could afford to rent but not buy. And by average household, it means the average household income. However, the average renter, again, based on income, cannot afford the average rent in Foxborough. So what we're seeing here is that there's a very real need for affordable housing in Foxborough. And in fact, when we look at the FHA's current wait list, and these numbers were up to date as of Monday, I believe, there were 2,539 applicants on the wait list and 8,305 family applications on the wait list. So very important to see. On the subsidized housing inventory, which is a count that the state uses to measure how much affordable housing a community has, there's only 865. So you can see that there is a real need for all of this. So as we move forward, let me just escape from that. I'm just clearing some stuff on the screen. So in addition to the housing need, there's two infrastructure needs that Paige had mentioned as she opened up the conversation. One is a signalization improvement, and the other is sewer improvement. And sewer in particular, I'll actually start off with that first, because as I work in many communities, sewer is an ongoing topic of discussion. And so the sewer project proposes to put a low pressure sewer system on Walnut Street. It would handle flows from this project once it is developed, and it would allow for existing buildings to tie into the system, either when their septic system fails or if the owner wants to tie in earlier. And that installation is dependent on this site having affordable housing on it. There's no other reason to put it in, although it would benefit other homes and buildings. It would not actually be cost effective without this project. The same is true of the signalization. So this putting affordable housing on the site will actually make the intersection eligible for state funding for new traffic signals. And this is in progress. The 25% design plans have been reviewed by Mass DOT. 75% design plans have been completed. And the cost of the signalization is $2.5 million. Again, without development on the site, the signal project is not eligible for the state funding, and they would probably just extend the existing barrier and median, preventing left turns in and out of Walnut Street. However, if the site is developed, the improvements would include signalization, obviously the intersection, pedestrian accommodations, so looking at adding some sidewalk there that could then be connected further. I mentioned earlier there's no sidewalk for people walking from this site or for existing residents to walk. And then altering the adding or lengthening exclusive turn lanes, realigning the approaches, and relocating the I-95 off-ramp. So that brings us to the housing needs, the town, needs affordable housing. There's some actual infrastructure that would benefit not just this site, but also other sites in the area, other residential sites in the area. But we're not at the project stage yet. And the reason we're not at the project stage is because the FHA has to do a request for proposal to dispose of the property. And by dispose of, in this case, we mean lease. It can also mean sale, but the FHA has to sell it under the terms of the legislation. So there's a couple of things that they have to do: declare that the property is available, identify any restrictions on the use, which we'll talk about a little bit today, determine the value of the property, and solicit proposals. And in order to solicit those proposals, they have to create requests for proposals. And in that, it includes a description of the property and the use restrictions, and also the evaluation criteria, which is what we're seeking your input on tonight. There's a rule for awards, so people responding to it know how the FHA are going to review and evaluate it. And there's also requirements for, when do they submit it? What information is needed? Are there site walks? Are there interviews, et cetera? And finally, contract terms and conditions. Interestingly enough, Chapter 30B, which is Massachusetts general laws that govern real property transactions, does allow for a disposition of a property for less than its market value, but has to be for a public purpose. In other words, promoting the public welfare, to use some slightly antique language. And affordable housing absolutely qualifies as a valid public purpose. So I mentioned that we want to talk to you about criteria, and there's a number of criteria that we can discuss. One is how the site's developed. The other is the architecture on the site, and also the relationship of the site to the neighborhood. So just to kick off our thinking, I'm going to show images of projects that either have been developed in Massachusetts for affordable housing or for senior housing, and projects that some of them have not yet been developed but are recent proposals. And then I'm going to show you some ways that you might want to think about the site criteria as well as the architectural criteria. So these are 3 examples of higher density housing, higher density in that they're multifamily, 3 stories. I think there's 1 4-story in here. And this is quite often used if it is senior only, or if it is senior but with a mix of families on the same site. So the senior housing in a mixed age development has to be in its own building. You don't have seniors living next to families in the same building. So these are examples of senior housing. This is the Lodge, of course, here in Foxborough with apartments. This is Pennington Crossing in Walpole. It is 55 plus ownership units, and this is an all market rate development. This residence at Orchard Grove in Shrewsbury also includes independent and assisted living or memory care. And then this is a recent proposal for Wareham that has, you can see in the back, actually, let me see if I can just zoom in a little bit. Fuzzy because I'm so far zoomed in, but this is the elderly housing here. And then if you zoom out, this particular proposal includes family housing in separate buildings. So, I mentioned that there's housing needs for the elderly. There is also, of course, housing needs for family. And so we wanted to show a couple of, hang on for a second. So here's some examples of housing styles that can be used for either a lower profile, in other words, not the 3, 3.5, 4-story, or if there was a mix of senior and family housing on site. These are some recent apartment here in Falmouth. This is also rental, but 55 plus and family mix in East Hampton. This is actually single family homes in a cottage neighborhood. It's one of the few cottage neighborhoods in Massachusetts. This is in Norfolk. And this is 8-unit duplex and single family mix in Falmouth. And so these are examples of relatively recently built projects at a lower density that could allow for a mix of senior and family on the same site. Now, one of the likely criteria that you'll want to explore for those of you who live in the immediate area is buffers. And I wanted to show you 2 examples of housing developments that had different ranges of buffers and topography to show you one of the ways to think about criteria is to think about how you would like to view the site from the street. Now, obviously, you could have the buildings right up against the street so that you can see them from the road as you pass by. This is a 55 plus independent living in Milton. It's got a mix of multifamily, 3-story here, 2 to 3 story here. There's actually an original building on the site. And then off screen are these 3.5 story buildings here. They've also got a cluster of villa, and this is all, as I said, over 55. They have 2 entrances to the site. This is the main entrance here, and this is a smaller entrance here. And it's on Brush Hill Avenue in Milton, which is quite busy. The buffer here is about 130 feet. It's about 140 feet here, and it varies along this edge, which is also a well-traveled road, but a little bit less so than Blue Hill Avenue. So what I did was I captured some pictures from Google Street View so that you could see. So at the secondary entrance, as you pass by, you can just glimpse the villas through there. As you continue past that entrance, so as you move past where the trees are at roughly 140 feet here, you can see that you really can't see the buildings at all. If you zoom in on Google Street View, you can just see that you might catch a glimpse of the color, but they're quite pale, so it's difficult to see. And then here, at the main entrance right here, if you zoom in, you can just, again, capture a glimpse of the taller building on this site. And then on this example, this is Highland Glen in Westwood. It's quite a tall building. And along this edge here, along this edge, I found, unfortunately, the pictures I could get weren't particularly good, but I think it's about 3 stories there. You can see the single entry to the site here with a side entry there. This is going to look very different because there's a lot of hilly topography in this area where Brush Hill was relatively flat. So when you come into the entrance here, you can really see that you actually can't see the site at all. And I think that's partly the function of the topography, but it's actually partly a function of this winding road where the one in Milton had almost a straight shot to the entrance. This one is a little bit more curved. And then from this side here, from this edge, which is about 200 feet, you can't see it all, in part because of the number of trees and in part because there's a hill. There's an existing neighborhood up on this side. I looked from Street View, you can't see the development, but frankly, there's a very large hill and a very deep buffer there, so you wouldn't be able to. So those are some of the examples, just breaking it down a little bit. The idea of if you're driving along the street, you have a significant buffer, maybe the entrance is offset. Those are some of the things that you can start to think about. You saw some of the architectural styles. I really want to bring it up here to, these are the things that we'd like to hear from you tonight. So if you think about site related, how is the site developed? What does it look like from Walnut Street? What does the interior look like? I think the best example of that was the Penrose plan, where you could see that they had a community green in the middle. In terms of the neighborhood needs, are there amenities that are needed for effectively this miniature neighborhood here? And how should that neighborhood be connected with the existing neighborhood, with yourselves? And then finally, which community goals should also be accommodated on this site? And so we had a meeting with town staff to talk about the technical aspects of the RFP, the application process, things that the developer would need to know about who to talk to for which information. And we asked them some of the same questions we're asking you tonight in terms of community needs. Obviously, the conversation with the FHA has been kicking around. So I mentioned buffers. Viewshed is a fancy planning term for saying, you know, the view that you get when you turn around the corner and look through to see, you know, something that might be special to you. Energy efficient development, on-site stormwater management, resident amenities that might include an office for a social worker, a playground, community gardens, greenhouse, gazebo. Interesting question. If anything, and if any of these things are there, should they also be open to the neighborhood? Should they also be open to the entire town? I think that's a conversation we'd like to hear more information about. And then community amenities. We understand from the Foxborough Police Department that because it's near I-95, there's always a risk of theft. So maybe it should have a surveillance system. Maybe it should be gated. Should there be community trails in the buffer? Have those be open to the neighborhood? What about making sure that there are links either to new sidewalks from the signalization or future sidewalks? And also we heard about the possibility the fire substation being there with the ambulance right there to assist with needs from the elderly. So I'm going to stop here. Actually, I'm going to jump to the next steps, and then I'm going to jump back to the discussion and then open it up for comments and questions. In terms of the next steps, we are right here in May identifying the performance criteria with you. You can see it's really at the very beginning of the process. We've had a couple of meetings to get to this point, but we really haven't been starting, and by we, I mean the FHA and myself, really haven't been starting to put this together until after the meeting with you. In June, we'll be working on drafting the RFP and consolidating what we've heard from you. We're talking about having a second community meeting between June and July to discuss the draft of the RFP and particularly the criteria to make sure that we heard everything correctly, get some more input. And then the final RFP will be brought together in July, given to the FHA for their vote, and assuming everything is in place, their vote to issue it. That ends the process that I'm involved with. But after that, I wanted to just give you a preview of what will happen. So once the RFP is issued, there'll be site walks on the site. The proposals will be due. Then the FHA will evaluate all the proposals received based on the criteria that we define in the RFP. They would select, assuming that there are good proposals in there, select a preferred developer, and then begin the negotiations and the contract at that point. So later than September of this year, the whole development process of trying to figure out what could fit on the site and how it would look and where the entrances and exits and all the things that we're not talking about now because we don't know the answers, that's when those would be developed. We'd get a preview of those in the proposals, but the real development wouldn't come until later. So with that, I am going to come back to here. I'm going to have this up so I can bring it up if people have any questions or want to point something out, but otherwise I'm just going to stop this and Paige, turn it over to you for any questions that may have come up.
Sure. So this first question will go to the Housing Authority. Do we still have Maggie on here? And Greg, let me unmute Greg. Let me see if I can find Maggie. But the question is there a way to get a breakdown of the FHA waitlist by those who live in town versus those who live out of town? Greg, do you know? And I don't, well, there's Maggie. I don't know if she's not muted. I don't think so. I don't know if you guys have that answer, but.
Unfortunately, the waiting list became a statewide list so that people could apply to all different communities. So I don't believe I don't know if Maggie's muted or not, but I don't believe we have a listing of a breakdown of Foxborough residents. I do believe, and Paige, you can maybe touch on this a little bit, that we can do preferential selection for Foxborough residents. So can you just touch on that a bit?
Sure. So just to step back, because as I was listening, I realized there were a couple gaps. You're probably wondering why we're even getting a developer. Why doesn't the Housing Authority just build this project? And one of the things, that's what I thought, all along, I'm thinking, okay, we got to find some grant funding and the Housing Authority can go ahead and build the project. And I soon learned that housing authorities are not able to build projects anymore. That's just not the way it works. The way the municipal finances, prevailing wage, and all sorts of other state requirements, it's now done through this RFP process. So the Housing Authority will have to put this out for development. However, the project will be restricted. I mean, it won't be like a private development with no restrictions. It has to run under all the very stringent state and federal requirements that are out there, which I know very little. So the way you do this is through a 40B. So everybody says, well, wait a minute, we already hit our 10%. Why would we have to do a 40B? And that's the only way by which you can permit this type of development. Foxborough has reached 10%. Emily mentioned those 865 affordable units. When I see that number, I cringe because the way the laws are written and the way that the fine print is written, 400 or up to 375 at least of those units are not affordable at all. All of the units in the lodge and the domain, 500 units, count as affordable, but only 25% are technically affordable, if you call it that. So really the number is a lot lower. It's closer to 500 units. So the point being, that's the need. So it will be a 40B process. The developer would be chosen by the housing authority, and then they would have to go ahead and prepare plans and do all the applications at the state level. And then at the local level with the zoning board of appeals, there would be public hearings and whatnot. So that's the time when we'd have that. That's much later. So local preference was the question. In the 40B process, the zoning board can authorize what's called local preference. And they've done this for, I think, Nadia Estates and several of the 40Bs that came through. And what that means is 70% of the units can be reserved for residents or employees of the town or families that have students attending in town. So either METCO students or charter school students. So that's 70%. Now, to caution you on that, first of all, it has to be approved by the state, but we've had great luck with that so far. And secondly, it's only for the first round. So the first rental, and these will be rental units, by the way, the first round of rent, we could get to the residents, but I don't want to mislead. Once that first round goes, then it's not restricted locally. So that's a long answer, but I did want to sort of set the stage of why we're talking developers, why we're doing RFPs in the first place. I think if the housing authority of the town could figure out how to do this ourselves, we would. Unfortunately, it's just not something we can do by law or by rule. Okay, so should I go on to the next question? That kind of answers that. Next question is, if this is done, would all the trees be cut down to up to our property lines? And that's a great question. As we said, we don't have a project yet. That said, I can pretty much assure you that we won't allow that to happen. And I think this is a perfect example of the criteria we're looking for. I wouldn't be surprised to walk out tonight with you folks saying, we want a wooded buffer maintained along the residential, the houses that back up to the property. Or we want, some wooded buffer along Walnut Street so that when we drive by, it just doesn't look clear cut and you're looking into the site, seeing all this development. So I think the answer to that is no. We will not allow them to cut trees down to the property line, but certainly that is something that we're noting right now. And if folks want to kind of put in the chat what they think about that, but I do think that most of the residents along there would like some sort of buffer and to maintain the trees that are there and possibly even supplement. I mean, things like fencing, trees, those type of things are what we're looking for.
Yeah, Paige, just to jump on that, I absolutely agree that having that buffer, it can be a criteria. And to your point, additional landscaping, fencing, other pieces. If that's something that people really want to see, that's something that we can put in as well. Important to remember that not all natural buffers are necessarily healthy buffers. This probably hasn't been touched in a while. So there may, and again, I haven't delved deeply into the site, but there may be dead trees that should be replaced. And we can also specify, the caliper of the trees that would replace them, for example, that they can't just put a little seedling in. So something else to keep in mind.
Right. And even things like, I know at the planning board, sometimes, we don't allow white pines because they end up growing up and they have just a trunk at the bottom. But on the other hand, sometimes white pines are good in the short term because they provide buffering immediately, but then they grow too tall. So things like that, those are the types of things we want to hone in on and make sure that whatever is built there is going to provide, they can't just throw, like Emily says, a 2-inch tree in there, white pine, and say, we did it. It would be very specific and something we would be reviewing. Let's see what the next question is. What are the other options in Foxborough for housing? In a previous comment, it was stated that Walnut Street came up often, but other options were available. What are the options? So I did respond to that in the chat. It's hard for me to go through all that right now. I did put it in the chat. If you're able to look at it, I did put a link to the housing production plan. So I'm going to put a shameless plug here. Take a look at it. We're still accepting comments on it. We're trying to figure out how to refine it. But we do have some sites. I'm just going to switch over to my screen. You guys won't see it, but I could see it. And I think I said it was on page 82. So let me go back up there. So we, in the housing production plan, and again, this isn't finalized, but I think there was a lot of vetting and I don't imagine that too many would be added to this. So the first site we talked about was the Auditorium site at the state hospital, just because that's a building that sits there and has no use right now and no purpose. I've been trying like heck to get the Council on Aging / Human Resources to Human Services, to take that on and build the senior center on around it somehow, but for whatever reason, it's too expensive probably, and we're not sure yet. But if that site is not ultimately used for the future senior community center, then I would be trying to push for this to be developed as some sort of senior or affordable housing. That said, it's a tough site because there's a lot of brick, and it's not necessarily conducive to it, so it's very expensive. So we have to get some funding to figure out how to do that. Site number 2 that we talked about was the Pratt School. That's in East Foxborough, down off Community Way. That's actually quite small, but we thought it might be a nice little, senior or veteran or some sort of housing. But again, where do we get the money for that, and how do we do it? But that is something we will be looking at. The number 3 was the Housing Authority property that we're talking about today. Number 4, we put in there somewhat not sure. That's the Schneider Electric plant on Neponset. They're closing that, and we don't know what they're going to do with it. They're not able to tell us just yet. So we put it there just as we don't know what's coming there, and sometimes having housing near uptown might make sense, but we just put it there as a maybe possible. We don't know yet about it, but it's there for discussion. Ashcroft Lane, North Street, and Terminals, that's out on Route 1. That's Craft property land. Since this was written, the housing production plan was written, the state changed the rules on that. And so there's a good chance that there will be housing going out there if the town allows it. Basically, the new rule is called the Housing Choice Rule. It just passed in the past couple months. And it basically requires that every town that is an MBTA community, which Foxborough is, ironically, so is Rentham, Medfield, Bellingham, all of which none of them have a train station, but MBTA communities are far and wide apparently. So every community that's an MBTA community is required to pass zoning to allow by right multifamily housing at 15 units per acre. That was a shocker to all of us. The plan doesn't even reflect it because, like I said, it just happened. It will require a zoning change on the town. I'm not sure the town is going to vote that change in, so we shall see. But that site is being mentioned, and we'll see what happens on that. And then I feel like I'm taking too much. The Saig property, that's on Moore Street. That's another project that's being talked about. It's a smaller one, and it would. The good thing is, I think he's looking to build smaller homes, like 1,200 square foot homes, and possibly with a 4 in front of it. It's sad to say that a number, something that starts with a 400,000 is considered affordable in Foxborough, even though it technically isn't affordable. That's sort of that market we're hitting. So apparently that might be coming in, but I haven't seen that yet. And then lastly, there's a property behind the Dairy Queen. That was just thrown at the recommendation of the working group. We have not been approached by by the landowner. We don't know if that would happen, but those are the sites that were included on the housing production plan. And like I said, Walnut Street in a lot of the conversations was really the one that folks seemed to latch on to. Okay, can you explain more on how the traffic pattern would work more than the aesthetics? No, we cannot, because we don't have a project. We just don't know. I'm pretty sure that the access cannot be onto Route 140, but I'm not 100% sure of that. Greg, have you ever in your conversation heard that? I feel like it's too close. I feel like it's too close to the ramp.
The access will not be onto 140. That's a restricted access, and the access would be off of Walnut Street.
Okay.
We don't know where on Walnut Street, but it's not viable to have it be off 140.
Okay, so that's as much as we know right now. So that's again where I thought Emily's slides on sort of showing what other projects and the view sheds. I would think we would want to be thinking of that, of where we maybe don't have a straight shot in, so that you get a clear line of sight to what's ever in there. Maybe, a curved roadway or something to provide buffering, so that when you're driving by, you're not seeing, the scope of the property, that it maintains some wooded. So that's the type of criteria we would be looking at for the residents. So, and like I said, in the chat, there are links to the housing production plan with page numbers. How close is this to the abutting properties?
The page, I did a quick measurement while you were talking.
Okay,
I just picked one of the houses on North High Street randomly, and went to Google Earth. I'm telling you this so that you know that it's not a precise measurement, but it had it about being about 250 feet from the property line to the house. Now, there are, of course, a couple of houses along there that have accessory buildings that are closer. I haven't measured those, but the on North High Street, the properties are quite deep. Now, that doesn't mean that there shouldn't be a buffer in there. Again, that's something that we're trying to find out. There is an adjacent property on Walnut Street, and then the rest of it is bounded either by 140 or the highway interchange.
Great. So that's helpful. Thank you. I wouldn't have known that answer. Is any of this development going to be funded in any part by the town of Foxborough residents? I don't think so. I mean, this is this is going to be a developer who comes in and does it. Obviously, they're going to make a little money out of it. That's the only way they come. But it will not cost the town of Foxborough anything. And in fact, the town will gain a signal on its most dangerous intersection. And I can tell you that the estimate for that, like Emily said in her slide, that signal will not be built without this project or without a project there, because the price to construct it is $2.5 million, which for a signal is pretty high, but it's because of the proximity to I-95 and the ramp. So there's a lot of work that has to be done. So that work alone is $2.5 million. It is a state highway. They should be doing it anyway, but they're not. We're not on the tip. It will not, it's not planned to be done. So unless this project sort of rises to the forefront, this intersection will remain. And as I don't know if you all heard, but Emily mentioned, we have heard rumblings from MassDOT that worst comes to worst, rather than spending $2.5 million, they'd rather just run the median, extend it along, and then there would be no left turns into Walnut or out of Walnut, which I know that would affect the neighborhood. So, so no, there won't be a cost to the town. Again, we get the signal. So let's see, here's another one. Once the project is complete, who will be responsible for oversight to make sure the property is maintained? And will this project need to adhere to our local zoning bylaws? I can answer the second part, the local zoning bylaws. The 40B process allows the Board of Appeals to waive zoning. So not everything, but that's how you get more density, is because our traditional zoning would not accommodate enough units to make a project worthwhile. So a 40B would allow more dense development. So it would not adhere to the R40 standards of one house per acre. And Greg, do you have any information on the oversight and how that is handled elsewhere?
No, I think pretty much the developer becomes either the management company or they hire a management company to take the project over as part of that development. And I'm not sure how the FHA works to find the new residents for it. In other words, because it's affordability, I'm not exactly sure how that mixes on today's environment. You know, right now, we work with SMOC, we work with other agencies to basically review the applications that come in for us. But, you know, one of the other things I think is important, I think, you know, we're seeing a fair amount of feedback that and expected that there's be a nice wooded buffer along the High Street, you know, property line, as well as on the Walnut side, whether, like you said, is existing trees or, you know, new plantings. Those are the criteria that we can have. Someone also mentioned lighting, and there's, you know, lighting's come a long way to make sure that the lighting doesn't, you know, pollute the surrounding properties. So that can be a design criteria to make sure that the lighting isn't going to infringe on the abutters. So those are things, you know, as we go further along, whether people want fencing around the site or natural buffers, those are all things that we can address as we work through the RFP, you know, process. It is a fairly dense site. I think some of the abutters along North High Street, you know, like we said, when you look at the plot plans, you can see the houses are kind of on the forward parts of those lots. So there is a natural buffer there where people can, you know, cut down their own trees, but we should be able to incorporate some type of a buffer along the residents to protect them. As far as like you touched on the traffic pattern, we don't know. I mean, that's basically what we're in the early process of determining, you know, what's going to be built. So we can't, I think one of the great parts about the site is the access, from Walnut Street to 140 is a relatively short distance. I don't know exactly where the entry is going to be, but as far as the impact on, people coming down, I'm sure there'll be a little bit of traffic, but once we have a traffic consultant will be, determining, I think you're going to have a lot of traffic, especially with the signalization coming off of 140 to Walnut Street to the parcel, not so much going down Walnut Street to South Street to, that. And the other part that I think it would be interesting to hear if any residents in the area think that having sidewalks to the shopping center would be a benefit, and sidewalks on Walnut Street. I think that would be something that I'd like to see if there's any input there.
That's helpful. Thank you. Yeah, these are a lot of good ones. I'm assuming we're writing these all down. All right, next question. Oh, not a question. Ellen Pullman has been sitting through many housing meetings, so she knows a lot of this stuff now. She points out that the difference with the 40Bs today is that we're over 10%, so we have all the control. Everybody talks about that project across from Stop and Shop, and it just offends everybody. We didn't have control over that one. We could not tell them what to do. We tried, but they were able to prove it was uneconomic, and they were allowed to build it as they wanted to build it. That was because we were at 9-point-something% at that point. We're now over 10. We're not at any risk of going below 10, even with the new census, so we're safe. So we do have the control. So that's a really good point, Alan. This is the town's control, the housing authority's control through the decision-making process. So we really do have that. Now, that said, I want to caution, because we've learned the hard way that when we over control, that, it tends to make things like, a lot of times the town decides what development should be and what they do, and then the developers just look and go, yeah, that's not going to work. That's like, so there is that balancing act of, we can restrict like crazy, but the result of that might be that there's no affordable housing out there, which for some might be a good thing. But like was pointed out at the beginning, if we don't do it, it reverts back to the state, and then they could build their own. We don't want necessarily them to have control over this parcel. I think it's good to find a middle ground for the community because we have the control. All right, here's another. Go ahead. Sorry.
There's a question page on how come it's been so long since FHA has added additional housing. That's a great question. The last project that we did was off of Baker Street. I think it was 20 units. We just don't have the land. We just don't have the opportunity to be doing it. And we've been working 10 years on this project. I mean, it dates back to Representative Barrows dealing with John Mitchellmore, trying to get the site. So this is a site, the other parcel that Paige, you're familiar with, is we're in the land swap with Market Street to Centennial, and that is possibly going to be a duplex off of Centennial. That land swap is imminent any day now, but obviously 2 units is a lot different than what we're proposing here. And then the other one is it the Pratt School or Payne School? I always forget.
The Pratt School.
The Pratt School, we're exploring an opportunity to possibly do a group home down that way. We've been working with a veterans agent to see if we can do a women's veteran type group home. But those are things that are in the future. But we've just not had the opportunity, and funding and resources are tight with what we do.
Thanks, Greg.
Paige, I can address a couple of the questions in here
Sure.
that seem to relate to the RFP process. So I've been taking notes on the chat here, the desire for deeper buffers near the residential neighborhood. I saw a couple of comments about the wildlife and maybe creating a wildlife corridor, understanding that there are animals in there that now that, that will be disrupted. And a couple of comments on, the neighborhood needing to be involved, which is of course exactly why we're here tonight. Just to note that this RFP, Paige had mentioned control earlier, this RFP is a process of that control, right? The FHA gets to choose who the developer is based on their response to the criteria in the RFP. So again, understanding your preferences is critically important to ensuring that they get into the RFP and govern who will be chosen in that respect. I do see some comments of, can the neighborhood be further involved, and certainly requiring that the selected developer undertake community meetings is something that can be added to the RFP as part of that criteria, if that's of interest. And it appears from a couple of comments that it is. So, thank you again for the comments in this. I think Greg's point about our sidewalks helpful. Would also be useful to know, but I'm certainly seeing the buffer, the concerns about wildlife, not noise and light pollution. So thank you for these.
Okay, let's go back to a couple more. So let's see where I was. I lost my page because so wildlife. I think we will have to incorporate something on that. Maybe they will need to propose some sort of wildlife corridor or whatnot. We certainly don't want to affect that. Seems to be some people want fences, some might not. Schneider was getting renovated for Atlantis. I don't even know what that is. So I don't know what that means. I believe one of the main concerns for this potential project for the abutters who own property off Walnut and North High is to maintain a high level of privacy and security. Maintaining an existing wooded buffer and site perimeter fencing on the new developed property is a must for the design phase of the project. I think the main concern should be creating a stronger buffer on the abutters side of the property and less concern with privacy on 140. Taxpaying citizens in this community need to be considered. True. Okay. Then there was a question about security. And then they said that usually these projects have perimeter fencing. So and then there's a question, 40B allows it not to go to vote? Well, no, it will be submitted to the Zoning Board of Appeals, and the Zoning Board of Appeals would hold public hearings, allow the developer to present, allow the public to speak, and then they would vote. So there would be a vote by the Zoning Board of Appeals for a project. Question is, did the residents have a say in this project? The people who own property are very concerned about how it will affect their property. Our homes work very hard for a major wooded buffer would be needed, not to mention the beautiful wildlife having their homes taken away. Duly noted. You have a say, you're being invited, but honestly, this project has been going on for so long, Greg.
I think, or just a reminder that this is the beginning of the process.
Yeah.
We're looking at having that second public meeting to discuss the criteria. And then once the RFP is issued and the developer is chosen, there's a whole public process around the approval of that project. So, there are more, that this night is not the only night that your voice gets to be heard.
Very true. This is the very beginning. Then there's a question of whether the developer pays taxes on the assessed value or the property when they're built. I actually don't know that answer. Greg, do you?
I'm not exactly sure how that works.
Yeah, we'll have to check into that. I don't know the answer to that. So we'll make a note and find that answer out.
One of the things that someone mentioned, that if this project gets built, the signal is an integral part of this development. In other words, that no one's going to be developing this site if the signal doesn't happen. I just want everybody to know that. And the sidewalks part of it, that's something that we're looking for input. Obviously that's a cost if people don't think sidewalks are a safety, situation. But I think for the units that are there, we feel it's an important thing to have sidewalks to go to the shopping center. It's a dangerous. I see people walking in the breakdown lane all the time, and people drive on 140. They're doing 60 miles an hour coming off of it. So I think the signalization is going to really be a big asset. And I personally feel that the sidewalks would be, make that whole area much safer. So
yeah. So I believe the signal plans that are at 75% design right now do include some sidewalk towards the shopping on 140 from the signal, I think about 1,000 feet to the shopping center. So one discussion we had in our working group with the DPW was that perhaps the developer would be required to extend that to the shopping center. And then I think Greg's big question is what the neighborhood would think about sidewalks on Walnut Street. I'm not gonna lie, I don't even know how easy that is to do because we all know what Walnut Street is like. Obviously that would change the nature of the street. So, it's more of a wooded, quiet road. So I think that's something where you might have a bit of a voice on that, because it would be a lot of work and it'd be very expensive. And if the residents didn't want it, I think we'd want to know that. I think we could maybe provide, access up to the intersection and then out to 140, but possibly not into, further into the neighborhood. That might be a compromise. So I think that would be something we'd be interested in here, is what the residents think about sidewalks on Walnut Street in general.
And I think there is a comment that they are correct. High Street and Walnut Street are scenic ways. So we have criteria to follow as part of the town ordinance. So you're right, the sidewalks could become a bit of a problem.
Hello, everybody.
We are allowed to have an entrance onto our property.
Yeah.
As part of the scenic way. Obviously, there need to be a culvert and whatnot, but that is one of the things that would be there.
That's right. Scenic ways, among other things, govern the stone walls and breaching of stone walls. And we heard that there were not any stone walls along this part. So if that's not true, please let us know. It also covers trees within the public right-of-way, and the cutting of trees within the public right-of-way has to be approved. And so, the open question would be whether or not there are any trees within the public right-of-way along here as opposed to the property. So useful to know. It's one of the other reasons that we wanted to talk about whether or not a buffer from Walnut Street would be appropriate. Paige, I saw some questions on the architecture, whether the project needs to be a larger scale apartment complex, or are the duplexes, multifamily housing, the smaller affordable single family homes an option. And, just again, so we're trying, Paige had mentioned balance earlier, and we're trying to leave the RFP as open as possible as to what's proposed, while being very specific about the impacts, how to mitigate the impacts that we want to see. So, for example, being very specific about the buffers, but leaving, saying here's the need and leaving open what the developers come back with. And that will be part of the criteria, is do what they propose, do the buildings that they propose fit in with the current context, and how do they meet the balance of the needs in the current context of the neighborhood. So that can absolutely be a criteria, and something we've discussed.
Kevin,
So Kevin Weinfeld, Chairman of the Planning Board, there was a question earlier regarding taxes. And if this was a traditional 40B like the lodge and the domain, there definitely are taxes that come to the community. In the case of if everything here is affordable, that I'm not sure how that mix works in terms of taxation. I don't know who can really answer that question, whether it's Ana Laura, who's the town assessor, or someone in that department, or the town accountant or town council. I don't know, but there is an answer to that. I just don't have it for you right now.
Great, thanks, Kevin.
Yeah.
I missed someone's question up top. I remember seeing it, and had to do with seniors. Let me find it. Question, where is it? Oh, sorry. Do we have any data that would suggest that if the increasing proportion of seniors in Foxborough is a result of existing residents aging and a lack of new residents? In other words, are we seeing seniors moving to Foxborough, or are the people of Foxborough not changing much and just becoming seniors? I feel like I'm supposed to know that answer. It's probably in the housing production plan, but I don't know. I don't want to guess. I feel my gut says that a lot of folks have aged, but I don't want to make a guess on that. So I would want to follow up on that and get a factual answer. It's probably a little of both. I know, I work in Foxborough. I don't live in it. And the more I get to know Foxborough and how awesome the fire department is, and I went on a tour of the water treatment facility and saw that your water now, I'm like, oh my gosh. So my point being is, I bet you people want to, that these folks some of these seniors have moved to Foxborough just because it really is a great community. But I do think we've also seen a lot of aging in place. We do have a lot of folks. I can remember from the housing production plan that we have many folks that, have raised their families and remain in their larger single family home because there's nowhere to downsize. So that's one of the things we're seeing is like a demand for some smaller housing units, not necessarily all affordable with a capital A like this is, but sometimes more naturally affordable just by the very size and the fact that it, might not sit on an acre lot. Those types of units are also needed to allow a lot of these 1 and 2 family households to downsize out of their big house into their small house that then allows the families to move in. So that's one of the big things, but I'll get back to you on if I can find real numbers on that. I don't want to guess. Okay, anybody else? What am I missing here?
There's was one right after that one about an additional empty parcel of land on the other side of Walnut Street. Could the state town choose to develop another large housing complex at a later point? I don't know if you know the ownership of that parcel.
I believe that's state or Concom. Hershey's.
It's state with a lease to the Concom.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's not going anywhere. That's definitely not anything we can touch. And because I know somebody was looking at that, and it's not for this project, not at all for this, but some other time someone was asking about it, and it was very clear that that land is, we don't touch that. Or no.
And Paige, somebody anticipated our wrap up, which is there an email that you can provide for folks to provide additional comments and feedback as they continue to think about this project? And I see you have just put your email in the chat. So fabulous. Yes, that's one of the things that we're going to wrap up this meeting with is obviously we're presenting this for the first time. It's a lot of data. I'll be giving the presentation to Paige for posting on the town's website. Please feel free to read through it. And if you have any comments, the RFP will take a couple of weeks to develop. So there's still plenty of time to get your comments and thoughts in. And we'd really appreciate hearing from you. So as again, her email's in the chat. And of course, it's also on the town's website.
Paige, is it also going to be on the cable, Foxborough Cable?
I believe so. I'll have to check with Mike Weber on, how it goes. But I do believe that even if it's not run, I've been using on demand on cable. So I'll just Google, like Walnut Street Housing Meeting, FCA. And I don't know for sure it'll work, but in my past, I've been able to do that with EDC and whatnot. So I believe this will exist in the archives, and I'll try to make sure of that. But Cable Access has been great. And since they do have this, and I know that someone is watching from home, so I know that this is being broadcast live. But yes, they're telling me, video.fcatv.org. So yes, it will be available as a resource. So share it far and wide. I don't know if every neighborhood was able to come. We want to be fully transparent. And, I don't know too. I mean, our next meeting, we were thinking of doing in person or some sort of, and I might want to know feedback on that. I mean, we all know everything's opening up next week. Apparently COVID's gone. So I know that at town hall Tuesday morning, we're no masks, no social distancing, public meetings wide open. So at the chairperson's discretion. So, but we also are sensitive to the situation. So if we'll try to figure out how to best meet the needs of the community. If it has to be some sort of hybrid, we'll do that. But I know some folks would rather meet in person. Respect that. Some people would rather do Zoom. So we're going to try to figure that out to give everybody a chance. Because I sure do wish that we could just have everybody unmuted and we could all be talking. But it's hard on Zoom to do that.
And I want to thank everybody for participating. I think, this was not our first choice to do it on Zoom, but due to the COVID protocol, we can't have open meetings. So this is a good first step, and I appreciate everybody's participation. And this is a process. We're not, the bulldozers aren't going to be there tomorrow. So, we're trying our hard to have community involvement, follow the criteria, and hopefully, we can get something built. There's no guarantee with the current situation of lumber prices and costs, prohibited. We still don't know if this is even a viable project. So that's where we're at. So that is all I have. Do you want to have any other closing comments?
Just again, I think from my perspective, thank you all for attending. Really appreciate your attention and your comments. I've saved the comments from the chat so I can review them and make sure that we address them as we go forward. And if you have any further ones, again, please send them to Paige. Paige?
Yeah, thank you, everyone. Yes, send me your comments, and please take a look at the housing production plan if you haven't already. Yeah, we'll be in touch on the next step. Like I said, we're developing the RFP. We've taken all these notes. So any more input you think of, like when you go to bed tonight or tomorrow, just whenever, just send them to us and we'll do our best to incorporate them. And like I said, we will be circling back to try to give you a better idea of what we've come up with based on all this input before it goes out. So I think that's it.
Great. Thank you all.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great night.